Okay, good morning. Chapter 14, verse 22, Chamishi, the fifth aliyah, in the portion of Re'eh. And from now, through the end of the portion, we get into what is known the portion of tithing and charity. This is the portion, in one form or another, shorter or longer, which we read every time we recite the Yizkor service. And actually, there's an interesting teaching which says that being that we read the portion of charity, we might as well mention the souls of our dearly departed ones, because charity is the best funnel for their merit to ascend on high and send down blessings. So it's not that because we mention their souls we read about charity, but because we read about charity, we might as well mention their souls. That's the power of charity. And this begins with the portion of tithing, but this is the mother lode of tzedakah in the Torah, covering almost every eventuality. 138 in our book. Again, chapter 14, verse 22. Aser ta'aser, you shall surely tithe eis kol tuazarecha, all of the increase of your seed. Here the Torah speaks in terms of agriculture. The Jewish people were about to cross over the Jordan. They were about to become farmers, agricultural entrepreneurs, and everything is in terms of seed and produce and so on. Hayotze hasada, that which comes forth from your field. Shona, shona, year by year. It's not enough to say, oh, I made money, but I have to share by giving the various tithes that we're going to speak about. In general terms, there are a whole list of charities which a Jew is obligated to give in the agricultural world, beginning with truma, which is the tithe given to the Kohen. The Kohen gets many gifts, so his truma is limited, about 2% of the produce. There is also the gift of maaser, the tithe, the 10% that is given to the Levi, and that's on top of the 2% that goes to the Kohen. There's another 10% that goes to the Levi. Why does the Levi make so much more than the Kohen? Because this is the only benefit of the Levi. From this he makes a living. Then there is a cycle going by the 7-year Shemitah, sabbatical year cycle. So the 7th year is the Shemitah year. There's not much happening in the 7th year, money-wise, produce-wise, because the field is wide open to everyone. So you have 6 years which are money-making years. Those 6 years are divided into 2 3-year cycles. The first 3 and the last 3. They repeat each other. So we have in the first 2 years, there's an additional tithe. And that tithe is called Maaser Sheni, the second tithe. And that is where the farmer, the Jew, sets aside 10% of his produce and takes that 10% produce, either in produce, or he can exchange it for money and takes it to Jerusalem and has to spend it in Jerusalem. And that, the benefit of that is that, number one, it helps the economy of Jerusalem. Number two, the Jew hangs out in Jerusalem, so he benefits spiritually, because Jerusalem is a place of Torah study, a place of spirituality, a place of a Beis HaMikdash. So that is the cycle of the first 2 years. The 3rd year, that second tithe, called Maaser Sheni, the second tithe, becomes Maaser Oni, a special tithe to poor. Doesn't make a difference which tribe they're from, even Cherokee, as long as they're poor. It's not a Kohen, it's not a Levi, it's any Jew who's poor. Very often that would be the Levi, sometimes not. So that's the 3-year cycle. Maaser Sheni, Maaser Sheni, Maaser Oni. And the same goes now, the second set of 3 years. 4, 5, and 6 year. Year 4, year 5, and 6 mirror year 1 and year 2 and year 3. So the portion of today actually begins with Maaser Sheni, with the second tithe, that which a Jew has to set aside and take it or its exchange in money to Jerusalem to spend. So let's again review the verse. Aser ta'aser, you shall surely tithe eis kol tuazarecha, all the produce of your field, hayotze hasoda, which comes forth from your field, shana b'shana, year by year. First of all, Rashi comments, as do many of the other commentaries, what's the juxtaposition, the association of the portion of charity to the previous portion of not cooking a kid in its mother's milk. Lo sevashel gedi aser ta'aser, ma inyan zeh itzel zeh. What's the connection between the two portions? Amar lehem HaKadosh Baruch Hu Yisrael. God, so to speak, says to the children of Israel, Al tigru muli, don't cause me, levashel gedoyim shel tvua, to cook or to destroy the kernels of your grain, at shehein bimei meseim, while they are within their mother's stalks. Meaning, make sure you have a good crop. Sheim ein atem ma'asrim ma'asas karoi, because if you will not give tithes appropriately, kishu samach nizbashel, just as you're about to have a bountiful year, ani meitziru achodem, I can bring forth an east wind, vihi mishadat foson, or mishadafton, will blast them, shenemar, as it says, ushteifa lifnei koma, that the corn was blasted before it grew up. So even at the last minute, a bounty crop can turn into a disaster, God forbid. V'chein le'inyan bikurim, the same applies for the gift of the first fruits, which the farmer is supposed to bring to Jerusalem to give it to the Kohen. That if somebody says, you know what, I'm going to save money, my accountant told me I have to cut down, the greatest insurance policy to guarantee wealth, says the Torah, is tithing and charity. And when somebody convinces himself to cut down on the charity, then unfortunately, God will cut down on the income. That's the message of the juxtaposition of this portion to the previous portion. Shona, shona, mikan, from here we learn, shein masrim min achodesh al hayoshen. Agriculturally, every crop has to be, the tithe has to be given from the crop itself. You don't take from the new crop and give it to the old crop, but there has to be a system. There's a famous medrash here, a beautiful story. There was a very wealthy, successful family who had bountiful crops, like the Ponderosa, and they were just real respected leaders, movers and shakers. The head of the family passed away, and his children took over. And the children met with their accountants, the Gemara says. And the accountant said, you know, why should you give, your father was a very charitable man. He always gave so much charity. Maybe you should cut down a little bit. That's what accountants always say. The Rebbe says, when it comes to charity, don't listen to your accountant. When it comes to charity, you have to listen to your soul. So the accountant says he should cut down. So they figured, you know, it's true. They gave massive amounts of money to charity just to meet their 10% obligation. As I said, I think yesterday or the day before, that the best way to look at charity is that God puts you on a 90% commission. He says, you can keep 90%. That's your commission. I want a little, measly 10%. Anyway, so they cut back on the charity. So the next year, instead of producing the 90% relative to the 10% of charity, being that they gave now not 10%, but 9%, so they only made 9/10 of what they made previously. So now the accountant says, you really got to cut down. So they cut down another 10%. So they made 80%. They cut down another 10%. They made 70%. And every year they kept making less and less. Until finally they only made 10% of what their father made 10 years ago. They came to the synagogue, and the leadership, the rabbis, made a kiddush for them. They said, Rabbi, we are in financial disaster, and you're making a kiddush? What, are you making fun of us? They said, God forbid. We're celebrating. He says, what are you celebrating? Because you used to be a very wealthy family. Now, mazel tov, you've become Levis. Now God is giving you the 10%. So we have the option. Either we could give the 10% and keep the 90%, or vice versa. And that's the message, aser bishvil shetit asher. Give charity so that wealth will come. That is the secret, which Torah says, the guarantee to wealth, and the evil inclination works overtime to tell you the other. When you'll have more money, you'll give more charity. Like this guy says, God, make me win the lottery. If I win $100,000, I promise I'll give 50 to the synagogue. He says, you don't believe me? All right, just give me 50,000. You give the 50 to the synagogue. And there are many other such stories. Anyway, verse 23. V'achalta, you shall eat this tithe, lifnei Hashem Elokecha, before Hashem your God, ba'mokem asher yivchar, in the place which God will choose, which is Jerusalem, l'shakein shmo sham, to cause his name to dwell there. Ma'asar degoncha tireishcha v'yitzarecha, the tithe of your grains, of your wines, of your oils, v'cheres bekorcha, and the first of your cattle, v'tzeinecha, and your sheep. Why should you do that? Leman, in order that tilmad, you should learn, leyira, to fear, as Hashem Elokecha, God your God, kol hayomim, all of the days. Rashi v'yachalta zeh meiser sheni. This applies to the second tithe, the additional 10% which we have to take and bring and consume in Jerusalem. Litin Maiserish, Shekvar Limdono, he already taught us, Litin Maiserish, the first tithe is given, Lalavim, to the Levi, Shenema Kisikchom es Bnei Yisrael, when you will take from the children of Israel, that refers to the first tithe. Nosan Lehem Reshus Lochli B'chol Moken. The Torah gives the Levi permission to eat his tithe anywhere he wants to, in Jerusalem, in Tel Aviv, wherever he wants to. The verse says, you, the Levi, may eat your tithe anywhere. For the Levi, the tithe was his personal money. It didn't have sanctity to it. Al korchacho, therefore you must say, that the second tithe is a whole different ballgame. What is it? It's called Meiser Sheni. It's that which the farmer has to take and spend for himself and his guests in Jerusalem. Verse 24, what if the distance between where you live and Jerusalem is too far? What if you can't schlep all your produce because you're a mega farmer, you made a lot of money, and you got truckloads, and that was before there were trucks. So how do you bring truckloads without trucks? Another problem, and this is a good problem, is that Israel expands. Israel becomes bigger. So the distance between the outlying areas and Jerusalem becomes farther. Asher Yivchar Hashem Elokecha, the place which God, your God, will choose. Jerusalem becomes further and further away from where you live. Losum Shmei Sham, the place that God chose to place his name there. Ki yivarechecha Hashem Elokecha. You'll have so much abundant produce. Why? Because God will have blessed you. And you can't just take a satchel and put a couple of fruits in the satchel and say, I'm going to spend my Meiser Sheni. You've got truckloads. What do you do? Rashi, ki says, the produce will be too bountiful, too abundant to carry. So here we have the redemption process. 25, in Osato Bakosef, you can exchange the produce for money. So now the money becomes sanctified as Maser Sheni money, and the produce becomes everyday food. What do you do with the money? The money, you can just take a small bundle in your hand because you can have gold coins. One gold coin could be a truckload of produce. And you'll go to the place, the place which God, your God, will choose, again, Jerusalem. What do you do with the money? Spend it in Jerusalem. On what? Can I buy a condominium? Can I pay for my lodging? Can I go to a hookah bar and smoke hookah? You can, but you can't use the Meiser Sheni money for that stuff. What can Meiser Sheni money be used for? 26. V'nasato hakesef, you can use the money, place the money. B'chel asher ta'aba nafshecha. Here we have an example of, as Rashi will explain, one of the 13 principles of Torah. We say it every day before the beginning of davening. Klal b'shloshes midos haTorah nidreshes. We interpret Torah with 13 principles. This is a klal uprat uklal. It's a general statement followed by a few specific examples, followed by a general statement. What is the rule? That klal uprat uklal. The general rule has to mirror the examples. It has to be similar to the examples. That's what he's going to explain here. You can use the money, anything your soul desires. Babokor, whether it's cattle, vatzain, or sheep. You could use red meat or not so red meat. Uvayayin, you can buy wine. Uvashecha, you can buy beer, imported of course. Anything you want, as long as it's food and grows from the ground. And you may eat it there in Jerusalem, before Hashem your God. And this abundance, this bounty, must cause you to rejoice. You and your family, you've got to celebrate. You've got to celebrate your success. You have to say, Baruch Hashem, what a wonderful year. Rashi 26, Klal. This is a general statement. These are specific examples. Anything that you want, is again a generality. Mahaprat meferish, just as the particulars mentioned here are Vlade So'oretz. They are products born to the earth. And they are fit to eat. So also anything that is born from the earth and fit to eat. That's why the hookah is no good, because it's not edible. I'm not sure where it's from, but it's not edible. So that is what you have to use the Meiser Sheni money for. My father, a blessed memory, used to say that in modern Hasidic terms, the Meiser Sheni experience is you go to Jerusalem and you have a fabringen. You take wine, you take beer, you take a l'chaim, you take food, you gather your friends and family together like the old MCI commercials, friends and family, and you sit down and you talk spirituality. That's what a fabringen is. 27. But don't forget the Levi. Meaning, don't think that because this year, because you have another obligation to do Meiser Sheni, you should take it from the Levi. You can't take charity from charity. Charity has to be taken from your regular income, not from charity. Don't leave, don't forsake the Levi, because the Levi does not have farmland, abundant acreage like you do. The Levi's income is his 10%. Therefore, there's Meiser Rishon is the 10% that the Levi gets. This is Meiser Sheni on top of that. So the farmer is actually giving a lot more than 10%. That's besides leket and shikha and peya and all the other obligations of what happens in the field, the corners of the field, and that which you forget, and so on. Rashi 27, Va'alevi lo yisazvena melitin lo ma'aser rishon, from giving him the first tithe. Gein lechelek benachla imach yotzo leket shikchu pei v'hefker. This therefore excludes leket shikchu pei and hefker shaf. Hu yesh lechelek imach bohen kameicha v'nechayam b'ma'aser. That all of these things don't need to be tithed because they are part of the charity system. 28. Miksei Sholei Shonim. Remember we talked about a 6-year cycle, broken up into 2 3-year cycles. At the end of every 3 years is the cutoff time. Teitzias kol maaser tuoscha. You must bring forth any tithe that you had set aside from your produce, b'shonahi, in that year, v'nachta b'shorecha, and you've got to put it in your gates. It's time to pay up. It's the cutoff time, which means that up to 3 years you can pile up certain obligations. Rashi, Miksei Sholei Shonim Bovelim, he comes to teach us that if he procrastinated in giving his tithes of the first year and of the second year, that he has to remove everything from the house the third year before Pesach. 29, Uvo HaLevi, and the Levi comes and takes his 10%. Why does the Levi get 10% of my food? Because he has no portion with you. This is his living. And the convert, the orphan, the widow in your gates, why do they get my food? Because they're poor. And they shall eat, and they shall be satisfied, satiated. Why should I give my money away? The old saying, you want charity? Get a job. Leman, in order that Yivorechecha Hashem Elokecha, God, your God, should bless you. If you give charity, God blesses you. B'chol ma'aseh yodcha, and all the work of your hands, asher taseh, which you will do. You want God's blessing? Support God's programs. Who are God's programs? The Levi, the Ger, the Yosem, and the Almona. It says in another place we're going to learn soon that God says, you have 4 very precious things that belong to you. What are the precious things that belong to you? Every person has Ata. You have, first of all, the person himself, which includes the man and his wife. That's one entity. That's the you. And then what belongs to you is Bincha Uvitecha, your sons and your daughters. That's 1, 2. Avdecha v'amosecha, your male and female servants, which in today's world, the male is the stocks and bonds and securities, and the female servants is the real estate. Your children, your investments, your real estate, those are what is dear to you. That is what is dear to you. If you want blessing in that which is precious to you, you want blessings for your family and blessings for your economic investments, so God says, I'll tell you what, I also have 4 very precious things. Who are my 4 precious things? The Levi, the convert, the orphan, and the widow. You take care of my 4, I'll take care of your 4. That's the deal that Hashem makes with the Jew. And that's the quid pro quo of tzedakah. Rashi 29, Uvo HaLevi, the Levi comes, v'yitel ma'aser rishon, the Levi takes the first tithe. V'hager v'hayosem v'yitel ma'aser sheni, they take the second tithe. Which second tithe? I thought the second tithe is what the guy takes to Jerusalem and makes a farbrengen. Depends which year. The first and second year he does that, but the third year, as I mentioned in the introduction, things change. It becomes Meiser Oni. It becomes the poor man's tithe. Shu shel Oni shel shonazu. This year, third year, the same goes with the 6th year. There's a special bonus for poor people. The third year, as well as the 6th year, you don't eat your second produce in Jerusalem in your farbrengen. No. The third year, as well as the 6th year, you give that instead to the poor. So the Torah gives an opportunity for poor people to catch up. Whenever you give, you have to give enough for a person to consume to be satisfied. You can't just give him one little grain. From here we said that you have to give a minimum of a gift to the poor person so that they could become satiated. In that case, if you're giving the third year's tithe to the poor, what are you running to Jerusalem for? You're running to Jerusalem in case you still have in your storage house the produce or the money of the first 2 years, because this is the cutoff time. There's a declaration that the farmer has to make. Biarti hakodesh min habayis. I have removed anything sacred from my house. My house is empty of charitable obligations. As it says in the portion of Kischale Elaser where it explains the details of how this works. So this is the introductory portion, the introduction, talking about the second tithe, and in the third and sixth year of the cycle, the poor man's tithe. Continued, God willing, mañana.